It's that time of the day where we get to look at more weirdos, but I'm not going to say too much about this video. So let's get into the video. Like the video as much as possible. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell so that you get notified when a video of mine comes out. And let's get into the video.
Well, joining me to debate all that and more, it appears is Pac, rapper and podcast host Zuby, activist and writer Eli Ehrlich, and here in the studio, uncensored contributor Esther Cracker and comedian and podcast host James Barr. Well, welcome to you all. Feels like years since I had you all together because it's so much happening in the world right now. We're going to try and, I think, get to slightly different non-political issues, although everything in the end is politics. And I want to start with a clip from Jon Stewart, who's back doing the Daily Show on Comedy Channel once a week. And he said this about the commercialization of Pride. I mean, he made some very interesting points. He talked about Burger King with their Pride Whopper made with 2 equal buns, Skittles colourless Pride pack declaring only #One Rainbow Matters, and an Oreo ad showing a family overcoming a father's deep conservative values with a rainbow painted fence. And he said that's the burden corporations must bear, he mocked. They care almost too much about the human condition, often finding themselves in the crosshairs of ideologues and fundamentalists, but they stand by their values, sometimes for a couple of months. And that was a response to Target, who, of course, abandoned what they were doing after the backlash. We saw the same thing with Bud Light and Dylan Mulvaney, and so on, indicating it may all just be virtue signalling. Zuby, let me start with you on this. I've been on this case for quite a while, that I think the whole idea of Pride, I loved it when it started. It was a Pride Day, great. There are lots of days in the year, and I can happily sign up to it. Now it's like a full-on month, and it's been completely hijacked by the corporate world in the most kind of shameless, insincere, virtue signaling way. Discuss.
Yeah, well, I think it's what I'd call woke capitalism. I think if you go back to the time of Occupy Wall Street around 2008, there was a massive backlash, both from people on the left side of the aisle and from the right side of the aisle, about what we could truly call corporate greed. And I think corporations noticed this. And I think a lot of them made this pivot to appease their natural enemies or opponents, which is the true left. And so I think by them throwing out these easy bones and virtue signaling about Pride, virtue signaling about BLM, or whatever else seems to be trendy, by the way, only doing this in nations where it is trendy, not doing this necessarily around the world, I think that they have been able to essentially, while they've annoyed some people, they've been able to appease their natural enemies and keep those people kind of quiet and satiated. So I think at a deep level, that is really what's going on. Of course, we could also talk about, ESG scores and things like that. But I think that's actually the primary root of why they've been doing that type of pandering. I think that's what it is.
Zuby points out a very good point that a lot of people would miss, and that is that a lot of these companies that are promoting all of this ABCD and woke nonsense, they for some reason, and very interestingly enough, don't go to the countries where all of this is not popular. They do it in the Western world where all of them are going crazy. They want to color their hair certain colors. They want to look certain ways. And that's a trendy thing right now in the Western world. And it's very hilarious that they do that in the Western world. Also, for groups who claim that they are a minority and claim that they're being persecuted, I have never seen a time in history where a persecuted group get times of the month given to them and are celebrated left, right, and center. They're celebrated in movies. They're celebrated on social media. They're celebrated basically everywhere, but yet they're the ones who are apparently persecuted and are apparently receiving hate from people, when no one can really point to a time in history where there was a group being celebrated claiming that they were actually being persecuted.
Is at a deep level.
All right, James Barr, would you agree with that?
I find it really surprising.
Eli, well, welcome to Uncensored, Eli. If you want to go first and jump in over James, be my guest. In fact, I'm delighted. Off you go. Eli.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually am surprised I'm agreeing with you on this. corporations have very little interest in the queer and trans community. I'm a queer trans woman. I've seen them marketing to me more and more over the years. And the very moment that we stop becoming profitable, they drop us.
Yeah.
It's very clear what's happening. And I'm on board with Jon Stewart on this. They are just virtue signaling.
Yes.
You've got a triple strike because I completely agree. Yeah.
Whoa!
I think so.
James Barr finally sees
I do
common
just want to
sense.
say I am wearing black today just to mourn Pride Month and also
mourn the end of
show
it.
respect for Pride, for straight Pride, which we're currently now in. Here's the thing with the corporations. I think sometimes they're doing it for their employees, and that's really important. I think it's amazing that some companies are showing support
when there's
for
no
the
straight
community.
month for the straight
Well,
employees?
as we discussed before, the rest of the year is straight peers.
It's not though,
July
is
is
it?
straight.
We don't
Yes, it
celebrate
is.
being straight.
This whole thing of the rest of the year is straight Pride Month is just pure stupidity and pure cope. Because if it was the case that the rest of the year was straight Pride Month, straight people will be going out onto the streets the same way the ABCD community go out onto the streets and celebrate all of the things that they celebrate. But we don't see that. So to say that the rest of the year is straight Pride Month is just pure stupidity, and it's not true. It's just a lie because they want to take up everything and they really only care about superiority.
Being straight all the time, just
There are
by
no
opening
street
your
parties
mouth
for my
and
straightness.
speaking over a queer person.
There's no
You're
straight
celebrating
flag.
being
What?
straight literally right now. And so it's important that companies do that and show their support for Pride, but a lot of the time it does feel insincere.
Actually,
Well, I mean,
let me hang on. I'll come to us for a minute. Actually, why should companies do any of this? Why? When did it become this thing that companies feel the need to lasso themselves to endless causes or campaigns? It never used to happen. When I buy a beer, I don't care that the beer company wants to put a rainbow flag out there to signal their virtue, particularly as they won't be doing it in the Middle East, where homosexuality is largely illegal, or in large swathes of Africa, or in places like that. So there's a hypocrisy and double standard with these global companies where they'll only do it in places where actually it's easy.
Well, it's crumbs, isn't it? They're just giving us crumbs.
So why
and
accept
unfortunately,
that?
They're motivated by the people that work in the companies. It's not because of some great outcry from
I think
their
sometimes
consumer
it
base.
is to do with the people that work at the company.
No,
wanting
it's
to
not.
do
It's
the right
all
thing.
the time.
But why do
that's always
companies?
the case.
Companies always want to look good when they're not paying people enough money or when
Well, I
they're
mean,
not doing the right
that's a
thing.
side issue. But like, look at during BLM, I was getting emails from ice cream companies telling me how proud that they are that I'm black. First of all, how do they even know that? And secondly, how is that relevant? I think this idea that they can get away with doing pride flags in countries where it's not illegal, but then you see KFC not doing that in India or in sub-Saharan Africa is ludicrous.
Yeah.
And it actually shows the moral depravity in these
Well,
companies.
it reminds me of the Just Stop Oil protesters.
so
You never
insincere.
see the Just Stop Oil protesters in China or India or Russia, where almost all the pollution is actually going on. So they don't dare do it where it's difficult. They just do it where it's easy pickings. They go and attack the Chelsea Flower Show or a cricket match or a football
Well, is that
match.
not a particular organisation based in Britain? Is that why we're not seeing Just Stop Oil
Actually, no,
in Russia?
they've got global aspirations. All right, Greta Thunberg, right? When do you ever see her in places like China or Russia?
Or the
She
Congo.
doesn't live in those countries, but if you think
But
about
she
other
goes to
activists,
America
Peter
and she
Tatchell
tries
has-
to bully them.
All of it with these people is just virtue signaling. They virtue signal and they only go to places where it's easy for them to do it. Greta Thunberg lives in Sweden, but yes, she somehow finds the way to get to America, finds a way to get to England. But as Piers Morgan pointed out, she never seems to go to China or go to the places where there is more pollution than the country she's going to, which is very convenient. And the reason people like Greta do what they do is because in the Western world, it's easy to do what they do. It's easy to go out to the streets where there's not really any repercussions for what you do. It's easy to do all of that because if she was to go to places where she will suffer the consequences of her actions, that's the reason why she doesn't go there. They only do things in places where it is easy. I saw a tweet from Narendra Kaur complaining about the Taliban, but it's funny how she can get online in England, in a Western country, and complain and type and tweet all day, but she wouldn't go to those countries where the Taliban are located to actually fight for the women where she's fighting for them online and typing where it's easy for her to do it. A lot of people are just all talk. They talk and do it from the comfort of their homes, while other people are actually losing their lives in those countries, and they're here complaining about whether they should be able to change their gender or not.
They do
gone
it
to
in
Russia.
places where actually it would take real courage. That's my point.
Other activists have done that. Peter Tatchell has bravely gone
Peter
to Russia.
Tatchell has. I think he's one of the exceptions. Normally, a lot of these protesters for a lot of these causes, they don't actually have moral courage. What they do is take the easy shot for attention and headlines. And to me, and I'm quite glad we've reached, a sort of general agreement on this, because I just think it really devalues to me. If I was a trans person, and I'm not going to speak for you, Eli, or any trans people, but none of this helps being a trans person, to me. All it does is kick
I'd
up
actually
culture war
agree
after
with
culture
that.
war after
I would
culture
love
war.
to.
That is so rich coming from you. Sorry, Eli,
I would
please
love to
speak.
see them
Please
give
don't
trans people
interrupt Eli,
raises. That would
Jen.
actually be doing something to help us.
Say that again?
I would actually like to see them give their workers better wages. That would help us a hell of a lot more than slapping a rainbow flag on some of their products and trying to sell it to markets in the US.
So actually do
it's
things.
It's not really helpful.
Right, so actually do things which can forge genuine equality and fairness for trans people, which is what we should all aspire to get, right?
Exactly.
I mean, on that point, though, given you've not been on Uncensored before, we've debated this a lot with other guests, and particularly James. How do you feel, given that trans people want fairness and equality, how do you feel about the issue of trans athletes in women's sport, given that it's so obviously, to me and many other people, unfair and unequal?
Oh, here we go. Well, let's leave it to the experts. The different associations have agreed on different standards for different sports. It's all very relative. A recent study actually found that we're too harsh on trans people in sports and require too much, too long of a transition to a point where the equivalent cisgender person would be at a disadvantage. So it's complicated. It needs to be drawn out by the actual sports authorities rather than politicians or pundits.
At this point, we can make studies for anything, and that seems to be the case nowadays. You'll find studies for anything, and just because there's a study for a certain thing doesn't mean that thing is factual. People need to start looking into these studies and the methods that they use to even conduct these studies, because once you really deep dive into a lot of these studies that they seem to bring up out of nowhere nowadays, you'll see that these studies are all done to push an agenda.
So if a 6'5" 230-pound biological male boxer puts their hand up and says, I would like to compete in women's boxing, would you be happy with that?
There are 6'5", 300-pound cis women too. Can they not compete?
They don't have the same physiology as a biological male. They don't have the same lung capacity.
They
haven't
often can.
They haven't got the same muscle mass. No, they haven't. This is the whole point of the debate, is that it's not just about taking less testosterone. You have as Caitlyn Jenner has articulated very well, you have an inbuilt superior physiological advantage over biological females.
Honestly, at this point, we should just allow men and women to be able to compete in the same sport, just so that we can show these people the outcome, because it seems to me that they don't think there's any differences between men and women, and they're just interchangeable people where you can just put an average male in an average female space and there won't be any difference between the two. Because if someone like this can believe that a 6'5" male is the same as a 6'5" woman, you have got to be completely deluded. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. We live in the most technologically advanced societies, yet people like this are trying to tell us that there's no difference between men and women. And the sad thing is, they say it with a straight face.
That's the problem. Now, I want trans athletes...
Not necessarily. Estrogen... Look, estrogen absolutely wreaks havoc on our muscular systems, on our ability to perform in sports. And there's a reason that the rules are so strict, because it does greatly affect our capacity to participate.
Well, we'll disagree.
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of the backlash against the so-called trans community comes from, because we all agreed on that first point that this is pandering and this is companies trying to make money and so on. But when people start coming to arguments about biological males competing in female sports, and by the way, notice the conversation only happens in one direction, and there's a specific reason for that. Nobody is concerned about men's sports or boys' sports. And that is because we're biologically different. And I just think that this is the reason why this conversation has raged on for so long. It's these type of ridiculous, frankly, demands that affect women, affect half of the population, particularly those who play sports. And that's where people just get lost. And I think that's where a lot of the backlash or resentment actually is stemming from. I think in the West, most people at this point don't really care. Go ahead.
I'm going to go. I'm the only trans person here. this isn't about sports. It's about a gateway for the right to begin banning.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pause it here because what I just heard was absolute stupidity. You claim you're the only trans person here. You're either male or female, and I'm assuming you identify as a female. So I don't know why you would even mention that you're trans. You should just say you're a woman amongst another woman. But of course, the confusion comes in and you have to label yourself the only trans person. I thought trans women were women. So you saying you're the only trans person here makes no sense because you would be the other woman here, according to you, because I don't believe that you are, but you would just be the second woman here and there would be no need for you to mention that.
Trans people from
No. I'm not right wing.
That's not true.
I'm not right wing. So how do you figure that?
No, it's
well,
not.
you
It's
certainly
not a
have right-wing
left-right.
views on trans
It's not a
votes.
left-right.
I don't have
it's not a
right-wing
left-
views
it's
on
not a
trans
left-right
folks. I
issue.
just said to
Look,
you,
I've tried to explain this
hang on,
before.
I want trans people to have fairness and equality and the same human rights as everybody else.
And even,
I just
even
don't
if
want,
you
I just don't want trans
personally
people to
consider
erode.
yourself on the right,
I don't
it's
want
still a gateway into banning trans people.
No, I don't want
from
to ban
different
trans people.
facilities
I would
outside
like
of
trans
sports.
people to either compete against their own biological sex, which seems to me the easiest thing to do, or they compete in a new section altogether of trans athletes. What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
So a new separate but equal league is what you're saying.
Can I jump in here? The solution for this is very simple, and we've had the solution, as far as I know, for about a century. And this is simply to have an open sports league and a female-only sports league. A lot of what people call men's sports is not even explicitly men's sports. Anyone is allowed to participate, but because of the biological and physiological advantages men have, if you take the fastest, the strongest people in the world, the best endurance, they're all going to end up being men. That's how it's going to stack up, which is why if you want females to be able to participate in sports, you need to have a separate league because they can't compete in an
I
open
completely agree.
competition against men.
I agree. Let's move on, though, because there's another part of Pride I wanted to talk to you about. I'll start with you, James, on this. That there is a suggestion that it's jumped the shark. And the reason for that, and we've got some examples of this, in Seattle, a convoy of completely naked bike riders and roller skaters had some questioning just how family-friendly the event was. You got kids there watching this. In San Francisco, Pride had a fetish zone where a man lying in an inflatable pool of urine where attendees were encouraged to urinate on him. Other booths featured participants getting spanked, whipped, and initiating sex acts on each other, all in public. And in Toronto and New York, the politics of Palestine and Israel took over, with queer, as they call themselves, protesters preventing the parade from progressing along its designated route by sitting in the middle of the road. So a lot of people saying that it's going too far. Now, James, I would say it does go too far when people do that.
I mean,
if you want to actually make Pride a family thing, which many people want it to be, how can you allow that kind of stuff?
You've given me a lot to respond to there, Piers. I would say in Germany right now at the Euros, there are English fans walking around with their dicks out, pissing in the street. I think if you go to Sweden, there are naked people everywhere, like in saunas, and it's completely fine.
You're
and normal.
comparing the fetish zone
I'm
San
saying
Francisco
that there's a naked bike ride in London very regularly, and kids walk past that naked bike ride. What you're doing is you're trying to make this a massive war against queer people, but actually this is just
I don't
all
want to war with
people.
queer people.
This is all people.
I actually
and
want
in
to
San
protect,
Francisco, where some of those people were naked at Pride recently, it's actually legal to be naked in events like that. So if you're taking your children to that, then that's on you. That's not on the queer community.
Right.
And as I said, this isn't just queer people. This is all people.
I think you touched on a point that all sort of movements can devolve to become a congregation of the mentally unwell. Yes, that is fine. But each community
Why is
must
it unwell
take...
to be naked?
You're mentally unwell if you're walking out in public naked. Yes,
Why is that mentally unwell?
Because you're mad.
So you're
Why are
saying
you
people in Sweden
you don't have
that
clothes
are
in your
naked
house?
in saunas, is that mentally unwell?
Yeah, I think if you're leaving your house...
Just because you have shame about your body.
Yes, I have shame. I'm sorry, I was raised properly. I have shame. I don't leave my house naked.
I was raised properly. I have shame.
Yeah, I have
That's
shame. I have a
terrible,
sense of
Esther.
shame. I don't think that it's all about me and what I want. I actually think of the
These
public.
people aren't there because
and,
of...
Well, here's the thing. Here's the point. You made a significant point, which is that there is a tendency for all movements to devolve into some sort of congregation of the mentally unwell, which is fine.
I never said that. That's literally not what I said. Those are your
I'm
words.
finessing what you're saying.
Right,
but the
thank
point
you.
here is that every group must take responsibility for the people within their own enclave, right? You don't expect us to tell these people that are getting naked in the name of pride to tell them to put on
But they're not
clothes.
breaking the law.
It's disgusting. They are breaking. It's
All right,
public indecency.
all right, okay.
That's
not,
not.
though, is it?
All right, hang
It's
on.
public
It's
indecency.
literally not.
Hang on.
It is not.
Let me bring in
illegal.
Eli on this. Eli, is there a line that pride has crossed, as some people say? I mean, Jordan Peterson said about all this, there's a real tinge of narcissism, sexual narcissism about the whole pride spectacle. Do people have the right to express their sexuality?
That is really bold.
Let me finish his quote. Do people have the right to express their sexuality the way they see it, to some degree, if it's consensual and among adults? But generally among human beings with any degree of civilized comportment whatsoever, it's a pretty damn private affair.
It's absolutely crazy how we've come to a time where all of this nonsense is being allowed, where people could walk around naked, and not only just walk around naked amongst other adults, but walk around naked amongst children, and people claim it's normal. I don't even know how we can become so degenerate. And part of the reason being is because people are just so individualistic that they care only about themselves. And when you care so much about yourself, you don't care about your society, and you don't care about the things that are going on around you. And when that happens, society begins to devolve into degeneracy, and the degeneracy that we're seeing right now.
Has he got a point, Eli?
No, he doesn't. It's Jordan Peterson. He never has a point.
He's a very smart man.
San
He has lots of good
Francisco
points.
was clearly demarked for adults. And I mean, personally, I was friends with some of the protesters that blocked New York City Pride. And what they're doing is blocking the human rights campaign Float, which is sponsored by Raytheon, who's currently committing genocide in Gaza. So they had their reasons for this. And there needs to be more context for all of these. On a broader level, we're not responsible for every member of our group. This is how the right latches on to our different identity categories and our different social movements to try to demonize all of us for the actions of a few that might be a little
What about
less
those who are
respectable.
not on the right, Eli, like me? I'm not on the right.
And that
I'm a
sorry, you do that to people on the right all
I'm
the
a liberal
time.
who just sees endless acts of self-harm by the trans lobby, when actually I'm with you. I want you to get fairness and equality, but I don't want you eroding other people's rights.
You keep on saying this, and yet your
Yeah.
actions speak differently.
What actions? What action?
Trying to get trans people banned from sports, comparing
I don't want
trans
them banned from
women
sport.
to
Hang on,
people
don't
identifying
misquote
as
me.
animals.
I don't want trans people banned from sports. I want them to be disallowed from competing against biological women. Different thing. I want them to be able to compete in
with
sports.
people of their own gender.
Or their own sex. They should compete with people of their own sex.
I think I just saw a head explode.
That is exactly the type of talking point that in 20 years we're going to be looking back at and regretting.
Really? So you think in 20 years' time in the Olympics? So to be clear, then, in the Olympics, you would have just what? Open Olympics?
Open season.
Sex is irrelevant. Gender irrelevant. Everyone just competes
Yeah,
against each
absolutely.
other.
I would too.
Really? So do you understand?
Well, everyone just can.
Eli, do you understand that by doing that, you literally end the Olympics? It's all over because only men would win. Do you understand that? That's why we separate them.
I have heard it all, and they don't really end the Olympics. They end the Olympics for women. And for them to say the nonsense that they just said is absolutely hilarious. And as I've said, we should actually just start to put this to the test and allow women to compete with men and put the categories together, and let's abolish separating the categories for men and women, and let's just all have them compete together. Because according to a certain group, as long as you identify as that gender, and you don't even have to go through surgery, because going through surgery doesn't even make sense, because why should you even need to change your physical body? If you just think you're a certain gender, you should be able to compete against that certain gender. So if they say that they're a woman, they should be able to compete against women. But anyway, that was another video. If you guys enjoyed the video, like the video as much as possible, comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, X, and TikTok at YinkaThatGuy, and I am out.